Hey guys, what up? This is a really short video in response to a question I got on the live stream. You guys will notice from time to time I post on YouTube that I'm live streaming. Click on the link. The live streams are on another website called YouNow, which is in some ways a sister website to YouTube and in some ways a competitor. But when you see that, you can click over and join the conversation. And sometimes I do announce my live streams in advance. So I do answer questions from people who donate $1 a month on Patreon. And I answer questions from whoever happens to show up when I'm live streaming, and this is an example of that. This is someone who just showed up and happened to ask a question. The question boils down to, what would you do if you are a vegan and your parents are demanding that you compromise, with the compromise being that you're expected to eat meat or fish a couple of times a year. Now, it wasn't stated in the question, but I'd assume the nature of the compromise is Christmas, Thanksgiving, Kwanzaa, Diwali, President's Day, the Ides of March, that there are some, I assume it's for special holidays or special, maybe it's going to your brother's wedding. Wouldn't it be easier for the whole family if when you went to the wedding, you just ate meat like everyone else? I assume that's the point and that it's not that they want you to eat meat when you happen to be at the side of a road and stop at a McDonald's. But it wasn't stated in the question. Some parents might be one way, some might be the others. So I started my reply by saying it is a little bit different depending on the person you're giving the advice to. Not everyone is confident standing up to an authority figure. Not everyone is confident standing up to an authority figure who raised you and cared for you and you have these kinds of complex emotional connections to. It can be hard. It can be traumatizing. It can be really traumatizing for the person doing the standing up. Whether or not it's traumatizing for your parents, I kind of doubt it. And, beyond that, there's the question then of what kind of rhetoric you deploy if you're going to stand up to your parents. So I'll comment on that first, and then I'll comment a little bit about the concept of compromise itself. So here's an example. What I used to call a vegan mind trick. I used to have a blog called Vegan Mind Tricks. If your parents ask you to be a meat eater for just a few days a year, you can turn around and ask them, for me, would you be Muslim for just a few days a year? The point being, if you converted to Islam, would they participate in Muslim prayer, going to Muslim temple, going to an Islamic temple, participating in that ideology, that religion, and that identity for a few days a year, for a few festivals probably, for a few ceremonies, a few days a year? Now, I think, again, most white Western parents would be shocked at that. It would suddenly make them think about it in a very different way. That the type of compromise they're asking you to make is a compromise, an ideological compromise, a compromise in your identity, a compromise in your beliefs. That is, I think, in many ways, much more fundamental than someone pretending to be Muslim, because you can participate in Muslim ceremonies without actually believing in the Muslim faith, and you can participate in Muslim ceremonies without doing harm. And the reality is, by buying meat and eating meat, you are doing harm. You're doing damage. You're doing damage to yourself, to ecology, to the animals, etc. Right? There are real outcomes. Okay? Now, again, this is the problem with giving advice on the internet. There are some families where if you said that to your parents, they would be delighted and say, oh yeah, great, that'd be fine. They'd be totally happy to become a fake Muslim, as it were, for several days a year. There'd be some families where you could ask the same thing about Hinduism instead of Islam, and it might be more impactful to say, okay, well, if I want you to participate in Hindu ceremonies and maybe dress as and behave as and learn the behaviors of and pretend that you're Hindu, would you do it or not? There might be some families in which asking the parents, well, would you join the Republican Party for me? Would you come to a Republican Party meeting and support Donald Trump for several days a year? Where that could get them thinking along new lines. And of course, for other families, that wouldn't be effective at all. It depends on who you're giving the advice to and what that impact or reconsideration might be. But, I think the next step has to be, if you say to them, look, Dad, if you came with me and you sat in the crowd and you just applauded for Donald Trump, we're assuming this is someone who opposes Donald Trump, or in another family, you could switch the examples. You could be asking them to come to the Democrat Party. Sorry, for those of you who aren't Americans, you can use your imagination. In your country, someone supporting an opposite political candidate. The reality is, Dad, Mom, if you come to a rally for Donald Trump and you just sit there quietly and politely and go through the motions of applauding and approving of Donald Trump, you do no harm. There are no outcomes. It makes no difference. All you would be agreeing to do would be to come and listen. Buddhists actually make that argument about converting to Buddhism, by the way, that all you're committing to is to come and listen, and I think you could say that even about, becoming Muslim in a temporary sense, in a non-committal sense. If you're not believing anything, what are you actually doing by participating in the prayer? What are you actually doing? You're just coming and listening. And yet, it's stirring to people to even have to imagine doing that several days a year because it violates their sense of ethics, ideology, identity, etc. They don't want to be a fake Muslim for even one day, let alone several days a year. They don't want to sit in the pews and listen at a Catholic church if they're not Catholic and so on, even though there is no harm. But the difference is, unlike going to a rally for Donald Trump, when you're going to a rally for the meat party, when you're eating beef, when you're eating yogurt and ice cream and fish, you really are doing harm. You really are having these kinds of negative impacts, apart from, in addition to, the sense of, violating or sacrificing your personal identity. Okay, so I think that wraps up for this video. The general point I wanted to make about compromise, I've said it in many ways on the internet. I've said it in writing. I've said it in videos. I think one of the false ideologies we're raised with from childhood forward is the idea that compromise is a good thing, and it's not. It's worse than poison. Compromise is a false god. Compromise is something that people are taught to believe in, and it's an idol that people are taught to make sacrifices to, and that is very, very dangerous. I do not think that anyone should sacrifice anything for the sake of compromise, and that's exactly what our society is constantly urging us to do. And, apart from sacrificing your time or your money or sacrificing your worldly possessions, traditional religious sacrifice, taking something precious and putting it into the fire, the worst thing about the ideology of compromise, the false idol, the false god of compromise, is that what you're being asked to sacrifice is really something much more precious than anything you own. You're being asked to sacrifice your ethics. You're being asked to sacrifice who you are. So whether it's your parents who are asking you to compromise or an authority figure in a school or a university, I tell you, anytime you do it, you're going to look back later and regret it and say, I wish I hadn't compromised. À-bas-le-ciel.